Last night, we took the time to celebrate Bishop T.D. Jakes, one of our nation's greatest leaders. Today, he is taking some of his time to share his wisdom and strategy on the critical importance of harnessing and leveraging our financial resources to empower ourselves, our families, and our communities. He is the author of the New York Times business bestseller, SOAR, Build Your Vision from the Ground Up. Of course, we know him as the great leader of Potter's House Ministries and the CEO of TDJ Enterprises, and now Black Enterprise Excel Award honoree. He is joined in conversation with none other than our president and CEO of Black Enterprise, Earl Butch Graves Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bishop T.D. Jakes and Butch Graves.
Good afternoon, everyone. Did you enjoy the previous session? And most importantly, did you enjoy last night's Blackmon Excel Awards? I want to recognize Bishop T.D. Jakes and Tommy Smith, who are still here. You all were truly, truly inspiring honorees, and everyone walked away, I think, emotionally filled by what you guys have done and accomplished, and it's been outstanding. We're especially proud, Bishop Jakes, to have you take the time. As many of you know, they are leaving directly from here and are going to Detroit for the 14-hour funeral tomorrow of the Queen of Soul, which they have a first half and a second half, I guess.
Oh, God.
But anyway, their funeral tomorrow. Are you in the first half or in the second half?
I don't know. I'm lost.
But it is truly an honor that they've asked you to do so. Hearing you yesterday, and I wanted you to touch on, because people look at all that has happened to you, and they don't realize that, as you called yourself, well, you're a good old country boy from West Virginia. And the story you told about your father and what he was being an entrepreneur.
Yes.
But what got you at 1980, at age 23, you became a pastor?
Yes.
Right? Heading up a small church in West Virginia. And it would be important to kind of set the tone for people to understand what you could become. What put you into that perspective? What put you into that thinking at that point, that at age 23, at the tender age of 23, I was going to become a pastor and have my own church?
Well, it started, I was ministering actually as early as 19, but I wasn't pastoring, and I actually started pastoring at 22. My experience, I was recommended by the Board of Bishops to have my own church, and they recommended, it sounded a lot more glamorous than the reality. The reality was they recommended me to pastor a church in a very rural area called Montgomery, West Virginia. And I don't know how to describe Montgomery, West Virginia, other than to say it had one traffic light. So that gives you some indication of the size of the city. But for me, it was a metropolis. It was an opportunity. And basically, I got the first month's rent and the deposit, and no members, no anything, and I had to build it from the ground up. And with passion and tenacity and relentlessness, I started to build a congregation from the ground up. And I tell many pastors, in many ways, it is like building a business from the ground up with no capital, no resources, just vision and passion. While the ministry itself is a spiritual goal, there is a practical need of lights and water and gas and paying the rent. And I was working at that time for Union Carbide, and I worked for Union Carbide for a number of years, and then pastored on my free time and built the church literally from 0 members to where it ultimately became.
You went from that small town in West Virginia to another town in West Virginia.
Charleston.
Charleston, bigger.
Yes, yes.
And grew the business. I'm going to call it the business because in many ways, we'll get to that a little bit later, but there's no question that this became much like an entrepreneur would grow a business, got there. But in 1996, you made a really big decision.
Huge.
Right? And that was a real big decision. And think about that. That, folks, was literally only 22 years ago.
Right.
So in 1996, you decided, me, Sarita, pack up the kids,
Yeah.
pack up the
Beverly Hillbillies.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you drove, but from West Virginia to Dallas to open up T.D. Jakes Ministries in the Potter's House in Dallas. And you told an interesting story about how you found the place you are actually in Dallas. Because having gone to Potter's House a few times, I said, what is out here? I mean, as we were driving and driving and driving. And I'm sure there was even less at that time in 1996. But what made you decide we need to leave now from West Virginia and move to Dallas? And then tell the story also of how you found the place in Dallas and ultimately became the Potter's
There's a couple of interesting things. Something that I didn't tell you that might be interesting. I actually was on national television before I went to Dallas. So I was on national television. I got on national television with $8,000 in the bank. That's all I had. And if you know anything about television, that's nothing at all. I didn't own a camera. I was basically in a storefront. I would use the footage from preaching at other people's churches to put on television. The first time people dialed 1-800-BISHOP-2, it rang all over the church, from the sound room to the pulpit, wherever we had a phone. I had church mothers at each location with legal pads taking orders, and that's how I got on national television. I also, another thing that people don't realize, my for-profit company is older than the Potter's House. It's incorporated while we were still in West Virginia. I had my own business going simultaneously before I ever got into West Virginia. What had happened to me is I had spoken for a myriad of people that led to it, but the premier spot was Azusa up under Carlton Pearson, and they kind of discovered me. And I started preaching in massive facilities, but I came home to what I call normalcy. When I moved to Dallas because if you live in Charleston, you realize if you want to go to heaven, you have to go through Pittsburgh. Okay, it's going to be a layover, either Pittsburgh or Charlotte. And I think it's US Air was the only thing that we had at the time. And my ministry and my life and my worldview kept growing, though my city did not. And it became clear that I had outgrown the city, and my purpose and my vision needed to be in a larger area. Frankly, I had more vision than the city had problems at the time. I always wanted to do outreach to the homeless. I always wanted to do something for people coming out of incarceration. I had these big ideas of what a ministry ought to be, and I was in a city that had less than 40,000 people. And I really wanted to be in something where I could exercise my dreams. And in order to exercise your dreams, you have to find a problem big enough for your dream, because your dream must be commensurate to some problem. If your dream doesn't solve a problem, you'll spend your life trying to market it to somebody and convince them that there is a need. But business or ministry or anything else thrives the best where it is a solution to a crisis. And going to Dallas to me was just like amazing, because there was a lot of problems to solve. The first thing I did when I got to Dallas was rent the Dallas Convention Center and throw a party for the homeless people. And I had all of this food and all of these clothes and a job fair for homeless people. And I was so excited to have something. If you're a David, you need a Goliath. You need a Goliath. You need something worthy of your rocks. If you don't have something worthy of your rocks, you'll stop throwing. And for me, this was a big Goliath of an opportunity. I threw a party for the homeless people. I brought in all of these clothes. I brought in all of these food, and I had a job fair at the convention center, and that was the way I introduced myself to the city of Dallas.
Outstanding. Let's talk about the Potter's House.
Okay.
It is truly, it's a massive, massive undertaking that you have expanded over time into a variety of different things. I think it's important for everyone to understand that you have the ministries and the spiritual side of your business, but you are at your heart, at your core, going back to your own father, an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
And with that, you know, oftentimes, I was telling you over the past 3 days. The past 3 days, we spent more time together than we've spent than anything else, but it's been terrific. But I've gone back and I said, let me go back and look at a number of your sermons, and to understand. And you said one of the things, and I don't remember exactly what the name of it was, but people trying to put you into a box.
Yeah.
People defining you and telling you what you can be and what you should be and what you cannot be, and how we stop in our own progression because we allow someone to define for us what our dreams or what our possibilities can be. And it is especially prevalent for people of color.
Absolutely. I think it's a real problem because I think that people like to define you because it makes them comfortable with who you are. So they say you're a dentist or you're a doctor or you're a minister, but there's a certain degree of incarceration in a description. Most of us are more than what we do. And if you allow that label to incarcerate you, it will limit the potentials that you have down to living up to somebody else's definition of who you are, when you could reinvent yourself, you could recreate yourself, and you could have a duplicity of interests at the same time. While I love ministry and I'm called to ministry and everything like that, I also have a passion for business. My father did, my grandmother did, my great-great-grandfather did. My people come from Nigeria. They were from the tribe of Igbos. Igbos are called Black Jews. They're industrious, they're business-oriented. Historically, ancestrally, I have always had that proclivity. Finally, I did not want to be at the mercy of a church board to control how much money I made.
Uh-oh.
let me just be real. I wanted to have the freedom to accomplish my dreams and still fulfill my mission. And so I wasn't willing to allow myself to be incarcerated by a board or a committee who says, you know, this is what you're worth. No more than I am willing to allow an employer to say, this is what I'm worth. Because you can decide what you're going to pay me, but you can't decide what I'm worth. You see? And for me, entrepreneurship creates an atmosphere for if you can work harder, you can have more. And it's up to you. It's up to your potentials. And while I appreciate the opportunities that a job provides, I wanted to be the master of my own financial career and my future and my 5 children and my wife, and I wanted to show her a better life. When we married, I had a good job. We had a steady income. The company closed down. I went through several years of unemployment. We went completely off the radar financially, repossessed my car, lost everything I had, couldn't keep my utilities on, carried water from my mother's house to our house. My wife used to have to boil water for us to take a bath. And there's nothing like trouble to make you fight your way up. There's nothing like trouble to make you fight your way up. In fact, if you take a bow and arrow, the further you pull it back determines how far it shoots forward. So I like to work with people who have had setbacks and been pulled back and faced impossible circumstances, because I really do believe that the further life pull you back is only a prophetic indication of how far you can ultimately go with your dream. I have seldom met anybody who did amazing feats in their life who doesn't have at some point in their life some sort of setback in their life from which they decided to tenaciously resist. So that tenacity, that work ethic, that drive comes from living in a house with no heat and carrying water from my mother's house and going up to Miss Anna Roy's house to use the telephone. It scared me. And it scared me, and fear can be a good thing. Fear can make you focus. Fear can make you relentless and tenacious. And I promised my wife and I promised my children that I would show them better than where we were at the time. My daughter was born on WIC, and I was determined to show them success. And let me dig into this a minute, because I want to get down into one of my daddy's stories now. On Sunday morning for recreation, my father used to drive us through nice neighborhoods. And he would brag about the houses that he shampooed the rugs in, and he shampooed rugs and did upholstery, and he would brag about cleaning the house. And all of them were owned by white people, and most of them had little black statues in the front yard with lanterns in front of them.
Porch monkeys.
Porch monkeys, yeah. And I was a little boy, not much bigger than the monkey, in the back seat of the car, wondering this question: wonder what success looks like in my color. I had never seen success in my color. And I wondered what the artwork would look like, and I wondered how the house would be decorated, and I wondered what would be in the house. And today, I live in a house my father would have bragged about cleaning. And I think I wanted my children not to sit in the back of a car on a Sunday morning and not have any vision of any success in their color. I wanted them to understand that the success doesn't discriminate, and that dreams are not beyond your reach, and that if you have a strong work ethic and a tenacity, you can become anything.
There's a strong parallel. You know, when I listen to you, it's like I'm hearing my father speak over and over again. But there's something for people who've come from nothing.
Yes, sir.
And when I say from nothing, my mother used to say, we didn't have a whole lot of money, but we were rich in other ways. And my father would say to me over and over and over again as a young man, the harder you work, the luckier you get. The harder you work, the luckier you get. He said, there's a direct correlation. He was in the military. He said, get up at 5 a.m. He said, because while they're sleeping, you're up doing something.
Old money moves early in the morning.
Right.
That's the God knows truth. Old money moves early in the morning. Young money moves late at night. If you're going to do business with CEOs, you got to get out of the bed in the morning. If you're going to do business with Puffy, you got to be up to 2 a.m.
Right.
So it's up to you.
Right.
I'm telling the truth,
right,
man.
right.
I'm telling the truth, and I want to do business with everybody. Right. So you know, yeah. I want without discrimination. Right. Okay, without discrimination.
This event, which is very special to us, because we've had Black Enterprise has had successful events for women for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And you have had tremendous success with events. We talked about Women Thou Art Loosed, and the 85,000 people in the Mega Fest, what have you, and we've had large events ourselves for women. We've tried to tackle what is important, which is celebrating the best of us as Black men, which is what you represent, which is what Tommy Smith represents, which Ken Chenault represents, which is what all of these men, young and old, represent, if they believe it. But they're constantly, every day, being reinforced with negative images, negative stereotypes, negative things that are pulling on one's ability to be clairvoyant and to see what they can become. Because the images and the conversation, even last night we said, yesterday, this white boy who won the Republican primary in Florida comes out, and his first thing he says is, let's not monkey this up with the Democratic primary person who happens to be Black. Mm-hmm. It's not an accident. It didn't just happen. So we have this pain, this rage, but we got to channel it in the right way. I'd love for you to be able to help us, okay?
Let me jump in, because black women are going into business more readily than any other people group in the country. And I celebrate that, and I think that's amazing, and I think that's wonderful. But as they continue to excel and graduate from college more readily and become more entrepreneurial, African American men and Latino men are lagging behind. Role reversals in the family have become the status quo of the day. And that's fine if you want to do that. But more times than not, the family is disintegrating. Because in order to have self-esteem, a man has to feel like that he adds value. And so there has always been, from affirmative action forward, a propensity to promote the woman over the man, because you get 2 for 1, minority-wise, when you hire a woman than you do a man. The underbelly of that is, it is the deterioration of our families. Because as the woman rises up in income, the man begins to wonder, why am I here? It leaves us with nothing to be proud of but things that are not important to be proud of. So that's one part of the problem. Add to that the criminal justice system and the high ratio of incarceration amongst black men, and the inability to get a job or a place to stay when you get out of prison, and we are losing sight of the family altogether. It is demeaning to come out because you did something minor, nonviolent crime, and most blacks, 70% of blacks are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, and many of the crimes of which are now being made legal. So the judge can smoke a joint and the guy's in jail for smoking one. It's interesting how that happens. It's interesting how when we ingest chemicals, we are criminals, and when others ingest chemicals, they are patients. You know, it's just interesting. It's interesting how that works out. Systemic racist behavior creates the destruction of self-esteem in the family, and I believe that the black male is highly targeted in that regard, which creates dread, anger, hostility, frustration, and it leads to the demise of the family, which is the substratum of the community. And the community is a substratum of the nation, and ultimately we deteriorate as a people when we're not able to hold together some semblance of family. It may not be the traditional mainline family as you describe it, but some semblance of connectivity. And so we have a huge problem in that regard. I believe personally that entrepreneurship is a strong message that needs to be perpetuated through our community, because what I'm basically saying, if nobody will hire you, hire yourself. Take control, create jobs, open up opportunities, and go after it. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy. The access to capital is not easy, but it is much easier today than it's ever been before because of social media and technology. We have never in the history of this country had the opportunity to be able to communicate with literally millions of people without spending any money like we can today. You don't have to buy radio ads, you don't have to buy television ads. That takes a lot of money to do that. To be able to get on social media and let your voice be heard, you can at least begin to launch some aspect of business through technology and become effective. So closing the digital divide is critical for us to have a chance at entrepreneurship, in view of the fact that we are often not given access to jobs and opportunities that will restore value to the male, that brings him into the family as a contributor and not just another expense.
We have focused on, oftentimes in this country, what is brought up into the divides are things like the digital divide, the health divide, the insurance divide, the education divide, and they use all of these terms of divides, not focusing on what we view as being the true divide in this country is the wealth divide. Because if you can solve the wealth divide gap, then if you have wealth, you have all these other different things, or access to these other things.
Well, let me switch to my pastor hat for a minute.
Okay.
It used to be a time that when people came up and asked for prayer, they were asking for prayer for their children to know the Lord, for their family to come to Christ. Now they want prayer for rent. And it is a challenge to make people understand you don't need God, you need a job. You don't need to believe God for a car, you need finances. It doesn't take a miracle to buy a house, and you've got people praying at the altar begging God for a house. You don't have to beg God or even believe in God to have a house, but we have mystified success to the point that in the faith world, people think that it takes an act of God to get what other people have in life, and that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. You know, I need God if I've got a terminal illness. I need God if I need a miracle for a deformed child. I need God for things that only God can do. When it comes to things that man can do, I just need a chance. I don't need a God, I need a chance. And if we begin to get things in their proper columns, we will stop seeing success as miraculous. Because when you make success miraculous, it becomes unreachable, intangible, and it becomes divine, and it was never meant to be divine, it was meant to be human. I want to go into something that we were talking about in the back, because one of the things that causes us to get from survival to success is our inability to connect together in business and to do things together. And this is just my philosophy on it. I mean, you know, it might be worth a cup of coffee. But I have always wondered why we don't trust each other. And I think when you add personal pain and a series of failure to how we also see images of ourselves on television, it's not just other people that see images of us that suggest that we are not trustworthy. We are watching too. And so when we get ready to do business in order to be successful, instead of forming conglomerates and coming together into partnerships, we isolate into individualism, insisting on owning 100% of a $10 bill rather than 10% of $1 million. And I believe that one of the problems, and I'm going to go really left on you here, so just send somebody out with a hook to pull me off the stage. It wasn't until I started making frequent trips back to Africa and studying my own roots and my own background and my own story that I began to realize that we were not one people when we came over here. That we were many tribes with many languages thrust on one boat, given one name, and forced into an amalgamation through slavery that is inherent also with a certain amount of suspicion. Because at the root of culture is language. So if the only thing we have in common is skin color, and we don't share language, and we don't share tradition, and we don't even share religion, and all of a sudden we're called darkies and then coloreds and then Negroes and then African Americans and then black, and so we've gone through a whole litany of names trying to get this mesh to come together. There is an inherent sense of tribalism and a distrust that is inherent in our existence, and we are still amalgamating us and emerging as a society of a people who were forced together by the most horrific circumstances. It's like bringing a family together where the only thing we have in common is child abuse. So to me, slavery was the molestation of a nation. I use the term molestation because molestation is about when somebody in power uses that power on somebody who doesn't have power to accomplish what they want. And one of the inherent reactions to molestation is self-hatred. So when you take that victimization and that self-hatred and that suspicion of, I definitely can't trust the master, but I'm also scared of you. And even though you liberate me with a document cannot liberate a mentality. So there is a mentality in us where we have not done as well as other people who have come to this country through other means, because we have not had the unity that is necessary to coalesce as a team and to put our wealth together, put our capital together, and work together. We don't seem to realize that I don't really have to trust you to do business with you because there's this thing called contracts. You know, yeah, that when you form a limited liability partnership, you are not in business with the person just because you like them or you trust them. It describes from the very beginning of a MOU what is a memorandum of understanding, and then on into a long form contract, and then the arbitration clauses whereby if you get untrustworthy, how we're going to handle it. We can work all of that out on paper, where we can then go to dinner and have a good time and relax. Because if you don't do right, I'm going to sue you. Now, once we get past that, oh, that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. If we were in church, that would be a shouting moment right there, because I don't have to go by instinct like I'm in a jungle in order to do business with you. I do want to do business with somebody who is trustworthy, but I also want to have a contract lest you misunderstood something along the way. We will have something to refer back to that clearly defines what the expectations are. And we have not been taught the value of doing business in a systematic, legal way that creates an opportunity for Nene, who does nails, and Bobo, who is a massage therapist, and Nikki Lee, who does hair, and all of them are paying rent on 3 different places, and all of them are paying to have things marketed, that if they all got together, they could cut their overhead down by 2/3 and increase the profit margin.
We have that. Well, we speak about this all the time. A point of levity, you know, my mother used to always say, and I tell this to my friends when I'm playing golf with them, trust in God, all others pay cash. The reality is we have in business an opportunity. We're asking others to do something for us that we won't do for ourselves. So you cannot continue to say, I'm going to the man trying to get the contract, trying to get the business, when there's someone down the street who looks just like you, who you won't do business with there. So I always ask this question when I speak to groups. I said, well, I call it, do you have a black X? And then I give them 10 things. Doctor, lawyer, investment banker, florist, nail salon, name it, clothier, whatever it might be. Most people, if you were sat in this room here and I gave you this same exact test, in this room, and I said, how many of you, 50% of your discretionary spending, just 50% of your discretionary spending is spent with other black vendors? And most people here, if you were honest about it, would come up with the word no. But in other cultures, okay, and I see this all the time, in the Jewish community, the dollar turns over 6 times before it ever leaves. In our community, it doesn't even land before we can't wait to spend it with somebody else. So we can't sit and criticize others when we're not prepared to find someone who looks like us. If I have to buy a car or lease a car, I will go to the other end of the USA to find a black dealer to do so. If I have to if my clothes are going to be made, I'm a size medium, thereabout. If I have to,
praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. I'm going to get somebody black to make my clothes. Because and if they happen to mess it up, I'm not going to say, because this is what we do. I'm swearing off all black businesses because one person messed up. No, I'm just going to find me someone else black who can make it. There is something, there is this thing, and we have the ability to solve it. Not all things, but there's enough. We make and generate over $1 trillion in the black community in terms of earnings. But we're spending it with others. We're not supporting each other. Now, I wanted to see what time we had left, but since I know the guy in charge, we have more time, as much time as this.
Okay. Let me respond to that. I personally see that two different ways. If you can find somebody of your own culture who does the job well, certainly we have to create opportunities, in part because other people are not always willing to hire or employ or use their services. And I think that's an important thing to do. But as your business continues to grow, there becomes a level and point in your business that you also have to be able to build relationships outside of your culture. I don't think it ought to be the first thing you do, but it ought to be, and my case in point is this. You've got people from Asia selling you Jerry curl juice, you know, weaves materials who come in, and sometimes the problem is that a business as big as your own has to also be able to do business with American Airlines or Xerox and all kinds of people. And so while we want to generate capital within our community, we don't want to become so inclusive that we exclude opportunities that go outside. And here's another place where I think that we as a people are missing a lot. I certainly think that whenever you can give an opportunity to pull a brother up, you ought to pull a brother up. Another global idea that I think is underutilized amongst black business is money is global. It's not national, it's not communal. We're talking about community money. People are doing business with people all over the world. If America gets a cold, the world gets the flu. The fact that we can import from Africa, from Nigeria, from Ghana, building bridges across the diaspora, closing the gap, broadening our perspective, thinking globally about your business. Just because your business is not in demand within your zip code does not mean that it wouldn't be in demand in other cities, other countries, other areas. And I'm going back to this because I think it's important. At the birthing of the internet and furthermore the development of social media, it leveled the playing floor. For example, I've had movies that I launched SOAR in South Africa. Okay, SOAR is, or I don't know whether it is now, but it was the #1 best-selling foreign book in South Africa before I launched it in America. We have to learn to start thinking differently about business. We cannot just think in terms of neighborhoods because #1, the traditional neighborhood doesn't always exist anymore. We are connected not always by street address, but we're connected by interests, and people galvanize around ideology. So people who like hip hop all get connected through social media and otherwise, and that becomes a community unto itself. And as people, and the world is going cyber, whether you like it or not, it is absolutely going cyber. And cyber is a tribal business from the perspective of people who like gospel music can go to an area and they congregate together. Finding people who like what you have. There are people who listen at me on Sunday morning from Melbourne, Australia. I was telling him in the back that our strongest following out of the 15 million people that connect with us through social media, our strongest following is not Dallas, is not Atlanta, is not Los Angeles, it is Lagos, Nigeria. Then Dallas, then Nairobi, Kenya, then Atlanta, then Melbourne, Australia, then New York City. You may be struggling in business because you haven't broadened your playing field. Somebody in this world needs what you have. You have to find them. And so rather than to feel rejected because the people around the corner do not value your fashion, your style, your design, your hair care products, I think we need to do more global thinking about business, because businesses that are really booming today, that are becoming billion-dollar corporations, are not segregating themselves to isolated locations. They are thinking globally. And here's the boomerang benefit of that, because everybody's money ends up being green. And the boomerang benefit of that is then you can put money back into your community, serve your underserved areas, create chances for people that have been left behind, and you can underwrite the budget with everybody's money rather than just somebody's money. Does that make any sense? So if you have a talent or a skill that is not prospering where you are, when I wrote my book SOAR, I used the Wright brothers as a syllabus metaphorically to discuss entrepreneurship. And the thing that fascinated me about the Wright brothers is there were many things I exhausted in the book called SOAR about it, but one of the things that I liked about it is that they didn't have enough, they didn't have capitalization, they didn't have a degree in engineering, they built an airplane in a bicycle shop, they built it in Dayton, but they carried it to Kitty Hawk to launch it because the wind was right. Because they knew in order to get the aircraft in the air, their engineering wasn't strong enough, they had to catch the right wind. And I think a lot of business people don't understand the power of winds and trends. I'll explain it this way. If Colonel Sanders were to launch his business today, he would go bankrupt. Because nobody, at the time he did it, women had gone to work, families were used to home-cooked meals. It was back in the 60s, we were trying to have the home-cooked meal with mama gone. So the wind was right. Today, if he launched his business now, they would want to know, is it gluten-free? Is it low fat? Come on, is it calorie low? Come on. By the time they got through going through all that, he would be out of business. So it's not just about launching the right business, but it's launching it in the right wind. These brothers took the plane all the way to Kitty Hawk to catch the wind. And I think that many of us are giving up on our businesses because we had the right aircraft, but we had it in the wrong wind. You have to put your business up where the wind and the trend is blowing in a direction to make you successful. And they got airborne because they got it in the right wind.
This is a good point for us to pivot a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about SOAR, the book.
Yes.
And what made you decide at this point, or at that point, to create the book SOAR? What was it that you were seeing was happening around you with stories of people who were stopping along the way, right? What is it that made you decide, and give us a little bit of background on SOAR itself? You just gave a little bit about the Wright brothers, but other aspects of what made you decide to do SOAR.
Well, my passion is working with second chance citizens who are returning citizens back into our community, which is a huge percent of our population. It is the underbelly of why we have fatherlessness in the home, which perpetuates an emotional toll on young boys and young girls who grow up in homes where there are no fathers, misread men, and it becomes very difficult to understand male communication, and often suffer for the lack of things that the man is saying, but we're saying it in a language that's foreign to you because you grew up in a house full of women. And that becomes intensified when men are locked up in prison. And for all of the reasons that I talked about before, and because many of us worked a job and found ourselves needing a job because a lot of the business has gone overseas and it is not coming back, I found that the Rust Belt states and the inner cities are saying the same things, even though we fight each other. We're angry about the same thing. The lack of opportunity, the lack of jobs, the industrial age is over, the technological age caused us all to fall into a hole. The president says he's bringing the jobs back, even if he brought those jobs back, which they are not coming back because many of them don't exist. But even if he were completely successful in bringing them all back, it only represents 30% of the population is employed in Fortune 500 major corporations. So 70% of people work for small businesses. And I thought that to have a conversation about entrepreneurship, which has been the underbelly of my family's progress and my father's family and my grandfather's family progress, was a very interesting conversation to have and would affect a lot of people and a lot of families who are being underserved. SOAR then begins to talk about how do you get your dream out of your head into the air, and how do you build it when you don't have access to capital, and how do you turn your resources back over into your business rather than eating up your profit margins so that you can get your bottom line up off the ground and begin to get the thing afloat. SOAR then deals with the fact that often when we start out in business, we put the money in the minor and we minor in the major. So we want to look rich rather than be rich, and so we're trying to impress people with outside things rather than inside things. We don't invest our capital, we don't minimize and keep our overhead down long enough to get our business up in flight because we want to impress people that we're in business, and we do it to self-sabotage our own success. Because we are in a bling age, we are self-destructive in the way we approach business. And I talk about all of that in the book. We have no plan, we have no strategy. And because most of us are so busy doing what we do, rather than thinking what we do, going into business is about thinking, it's not about doing. And so grandma opens up a chicken shack and she can't get away from the skillet long enough to balance the books at the end of the day, never realizing you can hire somebody to fry chicken. You cannot always hire somebody to think for you. So that's important. Understand that busyness is not business. And yet some of the busiest people I know are the brokest people I know, because they are busy, but they're busy doing something that is beneath you. If you don't reserve yourself for your highest and best use and don't learn to hire people to do things that they could do so that you reserve your energies for things that are isolated and unique to your skill set, you will eventually be busy. You will be busy, but you will never do business because you're so busy doing that you're not thinking the business. You have to think the business. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a structure. You have to go about it in such a practical, pragmatic way that you want to move yourself into your highest and best use. And I think that's important. So I started this book called SOAR. I have never had and for me, incidentally, this was like coming out of the closet for me, because I wasn't sure that the world would take a business book from a preacher, because you like to put labels on people and incarcerate them into how you met them. And people define you by how they meet you and incarcerate you. And so I found myself breaking out of a jail to even write this book. I was scared to death they wouldn't accept it, had no idea that it would be in the top 10 on the New York Times bestsellers list for 16 weeks in a row.
Strengths in one another.
Yeah.
When you see strengths in one another.
One of the things I talk about in the book, and I'm going to lead into where we're going in a second, if I go through your phone book right now, your iPhone or whatever kind of phone you got, I think iPhones are the only real phones, but we'll argue.
AT&T iPhones.
Oh, of course, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
To be clear.
God bless AT&T,
Yeah.
AT&T, AT&T, AT&T. Yeah, but if I go through your contact list generally looks like you. So if you're a doctor, you got a lot of doctors in it. If you're a CEO, you got a lot of CEOs in it. If you're a preacher, you got a lot of preachers in it. Here lies the problem. Fruition only comes through differences. So if everybody around you is good at what you're good at, they compete with you, they never complete you. So you want to surround yourself with people who are strong where you're weak. You want to hire your weaknesses, not your strengths. If you hire your strength, if you hire people, if you're a creative person and you hire creative people, then all you're going to do is create, and you're going to keep creating stuff, but nobody's going to manage what is created. You want to hire people who are anal, who are managers. You want to hire your opposite. You want to surround yourself with the opposites. You want to partner with people who are good at what you're not good at. You want to cross-pollinate by connecting with differences, and we do the antithesis of that. We surround ourselves with people who are like ourselves and then wonder why we are not fruitful. That's why I'm happy to announce that you and I are, because of our differences and yet our common interests in entrepreneurship and in business. Should I tell them?
You shall.
We are announcing today that we are partnering together to go on tour around the country doing SOAR conferences to help people who don't have access to information get the information that they need to be more effective.
We're obviously very excited about doing this, but I think it'd be important to talk about how we even got to this point of, because as you said, yes, inherently in terms of getting together with people, there's trust, that's a basic, but it's also being able to rely and see on each other's strengths. And so talk about that, how this came about, our partnership came about.
We do events, and we do events well, and we've done events a long time, from the Georgia Dome to the World Congress Center to the Phillips Arena, sometimes over 100,000 people at a time, down to smaller, more intimate events like settings like this. We have a relationship with millions of people that we maintain religiously through social media. We can access our database sitting here while I'm talking to you. Within minutes, I can isolate any part of our database. If I called the office and said, I want to send a voice message to everybody within 3 hours of where I'm sitting right now, or 1 hour, we could isolate that, and then within an hour, their phones would be ringing with a literal voice message from me. We have the infrastructure to do that. Because we do that well, and you have relationships with corporations who have a tendency to be scared of me because all they see is preacher, okay, and they have an aversion to anything remotely related to faith. We thought that if we joined our strengths together, I know the people and you know the CEOs, if we got together, we could inundate the community with information and access to opportunity, and help them to better utilize their resources, their finances, access to banking. And this is not just SOAR about money. This is SOAR in your health. This is SOAR in your family. This is soaring in your mental health, because it doesn't do you any good to make any money if your mental health is not good. It doesn't do any good for you to make money if your physical health is not good. So it's talking about soaring in every area of your life. And we want to surround ourselves with partners and influencers that will take advantage of our combined strength and bring the strength of your corporation to the table, that together we can make a difference in our communities. I have grown weary over my lifetime of waiting on the government to fix what's wrong in our community. I'm just tired of it. I'm just tired of it. I think that we are the people that we have been waiting on, and I think if we don't take our future into our own hands, we're just going to go. I'm all for voting. I'm all for all of that. That's important as it relates to policy. But by and large, I've seen them come. I've seen them go. I've seen them promise. I've seen them, and I've seen a lot of stuff. I think that if we build bridges together, we could make a difference. What do you think? We are looking for, we want to surround ourselves with people who are serious about touching people. And not only touching people to train for entrepreneurship, we're interested in touching people for companies who are serious about diversity, who are serious about inclusion, who are serious about intersecting, because a lot of times when you get ready to look for the best and the brightest, where you're advertising for the best and the brightest, our people are not looking. And so we want our combined union to be a bridge of access so that we can help fuel relationships, because when people have capital, they send their kids to better schools, they have a better future, they have a better opportunity, they get better education. And you have to realize, if we, people our age, and you're almost my age.
41?
You don't want to admit it, but you're almost my age. If we are training the doctors that will treat us, And if we continue to be number 25 in the world with education and minorities somewhere behind that, our physicians are going to be getting high while we're sick. And they're going to be doing hip hop while we bleed. We have to make it cool to be smart. We have to bring the sexy back to business. We have to bring it back at younger ages. We cannot wait till people are in their 50s and 60s before they wake up and recognize, I'm going to need retirement money. We have to start talking to our people about life insurance. I was telling him that a large percentage of people who die in our church die without life insurance and can't pay for the funeral. We do 400 funerals a year. And most of the time, the church and the funeral home are trying to cut a deal. Our people are not prepared for life, they're not prepared for sickness, and they're not prepared for death. And so our coming together for me is not about us. It's about us wanting to bring our combined gifts together to cause people who are not soaring to soar. Because at the end of the day, TD Jakes Enterprises is going to be all right whether we come together with Black Enterprise or not. Black Enterprise is going to be okay whether they come together with TD Jakes Enterprises or not. But the issue is our community going to be okay? And so everybody who cares about that, support these events. They're going to be small, one-day events. We're going to Los Angeles first. We're going to be in Los Angeles, and then
Los Angeles, the inaugural event will be Saturday, February 9th in Los Angeles at the JW Marriott LA Live Hotel. That will be the launch. And then the second city will be Atlanta, Georgia on Saturday, April 6th. It is not yet up. It'll be up by the end of this conference. And then we will add dates as we go along. But it's not about the dates, it's not about having to have people to travel. In every place that we go, there's an opportunity to help people to soar. And we have to find financial independence, health independence, and working with each other. And I would be remiss if we didn't take a moment to let you speak about, because the majority of this audience here is not millennials, but talk about the necessity for us in making sure that we're including millennials in what we're doing along the way, because we are missing the boat in many, many different ways. We're not being inclusive, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
if you don't include millennials in your vision will die with you. That's the bottom line. Not only will your vision die with you because you have not integrated them in your lifetime, the other issue is your vision will die because there's a huge conversation going on in their space that you're not in. And your old way of communicating is not working. Understanding what technology and social media brings to the table, and that's where they're at. So you can buy the ads that your father bought and nobody's reading them. You can go ahead and spend all of that money, or you can break down and succumb to the fact that my business is entertainment, and largely we do a lot in the entertainment space and in Hollywood. Eyeballs are leaving the big screen every day, going to the small screen every single solitary day. You can fight it, you can dislike it, you can act like your phone is gonna blow up in your hand like my sister does, and if I hit the wrong button, something bad might happen and the Cookie Monster might come up and eat up my hand. Or you can reproduce after your own kind by finding smart, bright, often educated millennials. They're coming out with many times more degrees than our generation did, but they lack a little something that stops them from being successful. And that little something is mentoring, and modeling. The behavior you model is the behavior people will repeat. And I think that we have a tendency, largely because most of us are boomers, first thing is, we are shocked that we got old. Am I right about that? Is that not the most shocking thing you ever saw in your life? Every morning I tell my back, you are a liar. There is no way you're supposed to be hurting like this. And why are my ankles swelling for no reason, blowing up like somebody just blew them up with a bubblegum machine? I am in complete denial. I am not accepting it. I am not going down without a fight. And we got all of this hair color and we got all of this dye that makes you look better than you really are. But those kidneys and those lungs and those joints are still getting old. We must begin to share the baton. We cannot do what was done to us. And I think a lot of times we don't include millennials because we came often from generations who said, when grown people are talking, shut your mouth. And we've isolated ourselves, and sometimes we don't understand them, but they are our children. They are our future. They're going to be our caretakers. They're going to be our doctors. And we have to build better relationships with them. And let's face it, the older you get, aside from medicine, the less money you spend. Advertisers are not paying big dollars to reach old people, except for health care. So either you include them or your bottom line is going down because your consumer base is going down. The woman who heard me preach, Woman Thou Art Loose, 28 years ago when I preached Woman Thou Art Loose and she was 50, is 80. Do the math. Do the math on your staff. If all of your staff is your generation, our ideas are aging. We think of diversity about race, but not about age. We need to diverse in every way. The world is changing. The way people think is changing, and we have to be. The way people communicate is definitely changing. And they are doing for free when we used to put up an event, we used to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for radio ads. Now, if I launch an event on social media, I save all of that money. We have to come out of the dark. Most of our organizations don't have a footprint in the place where your customers look to for information. And you could do it for free. I mean, F-R-E-E. Yeah, it doesn't require a 4-color glossy print ad and an ad company. It requires you creatively communicating and building relationships with audiences that every time they come in the city, I got barbers in every city because I found them on Instagram. People are not looking for you where they used to look for you. The yellow pages are gone. So bringing in young ideas broadens your audience. And I'm not saying we should throw our audience away. I'm saying we should add to our audience younger and younger audiences who are buying, who are traveling, who are moving, who are thinking. And I'm afraid if we don't do that, our businesses will become dinosaurs and eventually end up relics in museums, as many of our companies already have.
What does everybody think about our idea about doing SOAR? I want to recognize who's here, the First Lady, Sarita Jakes, if you would stand and be recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, Bishop T.D. Jakes.